Hey, what's up? Today I'd like to tell you about the best theory about where alien civilizations really are. And by the best, I mean my favourite. Ultimately, one of two things is true. Either we're alone in the universe or we're not, and both of those eventualities make me want to lie on the ground and hyperventilate. Alright, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so where are the aliens? This question is sometimes known as the Fermi paradox, the idea that there's hundreds of billions of stars in this galaxy and hundreds of billions of galaxies in the observable universe, and yet we don't see any obvious credible evidence of alien civilizations. Now, there's lots of different hypotheses that could be the solution to the Fermi paradox. Ideas like maybe there are aliens, but they're so advanced that we can't even tell they're there. Ideas like maybe most planets with alien civilizations on them have a catastrophic mass extinction that wipes all of them out before they can become spacefaring. Ideas like maybe alien civilizations are worried about being hunted by other alien civilizations, and so they purposely try to remain hidden. There's lots of weird ideas, and frankly no one actually knows the answer. But personally, the one that I find by far, and I really do mean by far, the most in tune with my personal outlook is a model called the GRABBY aliens hypothesis. Now, I know that GRABBY aliens kind of sounds like Frieza from Dragon Ball Z is going to molest you, but that's not what it is.
Let me touch your skin.
Personally, if I'm completely honest, I feel like a lot of the proposed solutions to the Fermi paradox are going out of their way to specifically try and find a solution that says that alien civilizations exist. Not because doing so is necessarily logical, but just because people like aliens. And yeah, aliens are cool, that makes sense. But personally, I prefer to confront what I perceive as being the overwhelming likelihood that the reason why we don't see alien civilizations all over the place is that for one reason or another, they are just not there. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm totally happy for us to spend time and effort on looking for them. I'm just not personally particularly optimistic about the chances of finding them. As to why this is, back in the day I'd have to do a lot of fanning about with the Drake equation to try and convince people of my point of view on this, but when I heard about the GRABBY aliens hypothesis, I was like, oh my god, that's a genius way of communicating this, and it was like a much more intelligent version of what I had been ineptly trying to communicate. So I want to tell you about it. First up, let's assess our situation. For us, intelligent life on the planet Earth, to get here, it seems like we've had to go through a bunch of hard steps, as they're sometimes called. These are like big evolutionary filters. Like if you imagine a million different early planet Earths, where the chemicals for life were there, but life hadn't begun yet, how many of them would abiogenesis happen on? Would it be 90%? 50%? 10%? It might be 1/1000th of a percent. We don't know. It did seem to happen fairly quickly after the Earth cooled, so maybe that wasn't actually that hard of a step. But then we needed to go from prokaryotic to eukaryotic cells. We needed to go through the Great Oxidation Event and develop photosynthesis. We needed to become multicellular. We needed to survive a variety of different mass extinctions. We needed to evolve from sea creatures to terrestrial creatures. We needed to develop intelligence. As to what counts as a hard step, it's a little bit hazy. We're not sure statistically how likely any one of these things are to happen, but you would presume that since the Earth formed about 4.5 billion years ago, if you took a survey of 100 different planets with intelligent life on them, however far apart they may be, you would presume that the average amount of time it took to go from that planet forming to intelligent life developing on it is probably somewhere vaguely around that amount of time. Not because it necessarily has to be, but just because if we happen to be really, really fast or really, really slow in relation to all the other life forms, that would make us unusual, which would be statistically less probable than if we were quite typical. So generally speaking, if we only have a sample size of 1, which is all we have in terms of life developing on a planet, whilst it's not a firm law that we have to abide with, a good rule of thumb would be to presume that we're fairly typical. So presumably we've developed in about the amount of time that other alien creatures develop intelligence in. Presumably there are a number of hard steps that all different evolutionary trees of life go through to get to intelligent civilizations, and we just happen to have got through them in a roughly average amount of time. In the absence of any available data, that seems to be a fairly reasonable assumption. Now hold on to that idea for a second, I'm going to come back to it. Here's something else to think about. I've been trying to tell you that an advanced civilization like the young one that we have here on Earth is a fairly rare thing in the universe, but another way of saying that life on Earth is rare is to say that life on Earth is early relative to the time remaining in the lifespan of the universe, in which more civilizations could develop. Or at least that's one interpretation, right? If the universe has been here for less than 14 billion years, and sun-like stars are going to continue to be born for tens of billions, maybe even over 100 billion years into the future, and red dwarf stars are going to continue to exist more than 100 trillion years into the future, that seems to put us right at the beginning of the story of the universe existing. Now, fair enough, star formation is already starting to trail off, but the early universe was also very unstable, and the materials to create terrestrial planets literally didn't exist. So we are arguably within a few billion years of being here as early as an intelligent species possibly could have been here. Couple billion years behind us, more than 100 trillion years in front of us. Seems to me like we're pretty early to the party. Now, this argument is stronger if red dwarf star systems allow life to evolve in them, them. They're certainly a lot less habitable than Sun-like stars, but even if life develops 100 times slower on a planet around a red dwarf star, that's kind of offset by how long-lived red dwarfs are. That's not necessarily a perfect calculus, but to be honest, even if you consider Sun-like stars to be the only habitable type of star system in the entire universe, still we seem to be pretty early. Okay, so based on the estimate of roughly the number of hard steps that we went through in order to evolve, and the maximum lifespan of a planet on which civilizations could develop, the research team that came up with the GRABBY aliens model produced this graph, which shows where humanity is in time relative to other expected alien civilizations in the universe. Now, they did a lot of maths and stuff to figure this out. You can go on a deep dive into that topic if you like, but let's keep it simple and just look at the graph. The x-axis shows the maximum amount of time that a planet has in order to evolve life on it before that planet becomes uninhabitable again. For Earth, it's about 5.5 billion years, because we've been here 4.5 billion so far, and in the next billion, the planet is probably going to become unsuitable for life based on the evolution of the sun. And on the y-axis is how many hard steps you think life has to go through in order to end up in basically the position that we are in now. Now, the argument is that life has to go through somewhere between 3 and 12 hard steps, so take an estimate of about 6, and then if Earth-like planets with Earth-like stars are the only type of world on which intelligent civilizations could evolve, then we're roughly on this line, which means human civilization is within the first 25% of intelligent civilizations to evolve in the universe. Whereas if you think that red dwarf stars are capable of developing life, that means that human civilization is ridiculously close to the very beginning of intelligent civilizations existing in this universe. Like, we're within the first fraction of a percent. Now, the way that this is graphed out here, it looks like almost any parameters you could give would give you the answer that we're really early, but the point is that you seem to have to give really unrealistic numbers to not get the answer that we are really early. That just seems to be how the numbers work out. But that seems weird, right? Because if we're early, that makes our situation unlikely. So is there something about this situation that we are missing? The answer is yes. What we're missing is the concept of GRABBY civilizations. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this. Alright, thanks. Back to the video. So in order to become a GRABBY civilization, you need to basically do 3 things. You need to start expanding into space, not just taking the occasional trip to other planets in the solar system, but like seriously expanding out into interstellar and eventually intergalactic space. The second thing is you need to last for a long time. You're not a GRABBY civilization if you start expanding but then you die out. You need to be a long-lived civilization. And the last thing is that wherever you go, you need to substantially change the environment. So you're not setting up one little base on a planet. You're not even setting up one little city. You're doing mega solar system scale engineering. You're making ecomonopolises, you're decomposing planets into space habitats, you're making Dyson spheres, all of that shit. Now the thing is, I think that all of those things are likely. I'm not twisting myself into knots to try and come to that conclusion. That's what I assumed would happen. Now again, people think about this differently, so I'm sure people in the comments are going to have different takes on this, but to me, one, I think we're going to expand into space. Unless there's something to explicitly stop us from going to other star systems, I think on multi-millennia timescales, we are just going to gradually spread out into the galaxy, even if doing so offers no benefit whatsoever to anyone that's alive at the time when they set off, because it's going to take so long to get there. I still think people will do it so long as there's nothing explicitly to stop them. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if future civilizations do develop ways to think on much longer timescales than we do. I'm just saying, even if that doesn't happen, I can still see interstellar travel happening anyway. Shits and giggles, you know what humans are like. Now, interstellar travel theoretically could be impossible. There could be more interstellar space debris than we think there is, and it makes interstellar travel just inherently basically impossible. The engineering challenges could be so vast that they're just insurmountable, but all I can do is personally weigh up the likelihood of what I think is going to happen based on the information I'm familiar with, and I'm fairly certain that we will be able to go interstellar at some point. I don't know if it's hundreds of years or thousands of years from now, but sooner or later we're going to get a colony ship, or cryogenically frozen people, or frozen human embryos, or virtual uploaded minds, I don't know, whatever it is. Somehow we're going to get people of some variety to another star system, and once it happens once, we've proven that it's doable, and there's always going to be another idiot that decides, hey, let's do it again. I mean, really, spreading out into the universe is just an extension of what we do naturally anyway. Species that are successful want to maximally utilize the available resources. Ones that don't do that tend to get outcompeted by the ones that do that. So it's fairly evolutionarily baked into us at this point, but even from a sheer analytical perspective, it's just a good idea to fully utilize all the resources available to us, even if they are, admittedly, incredibly far away. Secondly, lasting a long time. I think this is a little bit hard to see because thinking about this topic is a little bit distorted distorted by the time in which we currently live. We currently live in a very, very volatile moment because it's essentially the only time in which we've had the capacity to potentially wipe ourselves out, or at least push ourselves back to a slightly more primitive way of life. There hasn't been another time in history where we've all been on one planet and that planet has had lots of people with nuclear weapons on it, and we won't be in that situation again once we have self-sufficient colonies off-world. And it's not just nukes. There's superviruses, there's whatever the hell AI is going to do. There are existential threats right now because in a lot of different ways we're kind of in the elbow of the exponential for lots of different things that are happening. Technology's developing, culture's developing, but I think once you go interplanetary, and especially once you go interstellar, it becomes incredibly difficult to wipe out a civilization, particularly interstellar. Like, how do you wipe out human beings if they're spread across like a dozen different star systems? Even if a supernova happened, most of the people would be fine. So there isn't really a thing known to science that can destroy all of us at that point. Maybe if our descendants end up doing some virtual mind upload stuff, and then some kind of virtual virus gets beamed between different star systems and we all end up being corrupted by that or something. You have to come up with quite a sci-fi idea for it to even come close to potentially having a destructive effect capable of killing absolutely all of the people in an interstellar civilization, or you could say multiple independent civilizations spread across various stars. Doesn't really matter in this context whether they're one contiguous civilization or not. The point is that they're future humans that have spread out into the universe. I don't want to say that it will be impossible to destroy our descendants at that point, but I do think it would be exceptionally difficult to do. Many, 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 many orders of magnitude more difficult than it is to do now. In fact, that's already true once we go interplanetary, let alone interstellar. So I think if we get through this fairly turbulent patch of human history that we're living in right now, things do look significantly more certain going forward. And lastly, the third thing is changing the environment. We've already done this on Earth, right? We build cities all over the place wherever we go. Human influence touches every inch of this planet. You can go to some of the most remote places in the middle of the ocean and see a plastic bottle floating there. For better or worse, human stuff is everywhere. That's how we survive. Instead of us adapting to the environment, we adapt our environment to us. Our technological civilization is a really extreme manifestation of that. And if we go to a fresh star system with totally untouched resources, you can bet we are going to utilize the fuck out of those resources. And if you check off all three of those points, that makes a grabby civilization. And the reason why it's grabby is that it creates a very interesting situation, because as this species expands into space, and even if it's essentially individual rogue factions breaking off and going to neighboring star systems, you can treat it as one entity expanding into space, and you could almost represent this civilization as like a sphere that's growing at some percentage of the speed of light. You know, assuming that we don't end up with warp drives or wormholes or whatever, but I always prefer to be realistic with speculative methods of transportation rather than magic ones. So let's assume that they're expanding outwards from their planet of origin at some percentage of the speed of light on average, and they're persisting everywhere they go, and they're changing everywhere they touch. This creates a situation where once they get to a location, once this civilization colonizes a solar system, that solar system can't develop new life of its own, right? Like, you're not having abiogenesis occurring in the middle of downtown Manhattan right now, are you? Because whenever we change something for it to be fit for humans, that change makes it no longer fit for the development of new life. And even if there was life already on a planet that we got to, I guess either we'd ignore it, or we'd incorporate it into our civilization, or we'd be so advanced compared to it that we just outcompete it and it would go extinct. So this expanding sphere of this civilization's influence out into the galaxy is simultaneously that civilization growing and also a region in which no new civilizations can develop. If you take all the factors that we've talked about and you model it all out, given the number of hard steps and how early we've developed in the universe and the presumption that we're going to expand and change and colonize and persist in places that we go to, you end up with something that looks like this. A bunch of expanding, grabby civilizations that expand over billions of years. They start roughly near the peak of star formation and they continue going for billions or tens of billions of years until the entire universe is colonized. Because theoretically, you don't really even need to stop at one galaxy. Yes, the technical challenges, which are already to us right now completely insurmountable, just going from one star to another, are exponentially more difficult going from one galaxy to another, because the journey is going to take at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions of years to complete. It is, at least theoretically, possible to achieve. So a civilization that's already colonized a galaxy and it's sat there for a few million years might be fairly likely to go, fuck it, we'll just throw a few billion vessels in that direction, because that's just pocket change to them at that point, given the amount of of infrastructure that they've got. And this whole model is so good because it takes our weird situation of it looking like we're really, really early as intelligent life forms in the universe, and it shows us that maybe, actually, we aren't early. We're right where we need to be. Because if human civilization had developed later, 50 billion years from now, there wouldn't be any planets for us to develop on, because all of those planets, all of those star systems, all of those galaxies would already have been colonized by other expansionist, grabby alien civilizations. It actually explains why we look early, because for all grabby civilizations, before they become grabby, right, when they're in the situation that we're in, where we're right at the beginning of our potential spacefaring future, all of these proto-grabby civilizations look out into the universe and wonder why they're the only one. It's because essentially all of them have to be early to the universe, because that's the only way that you get to exist at all. So in a way, that makes us actually typical. You also get some really cool effects from this. It turns out that if their exact model is right, about half of the universe is already currently colonized. Like when you look up into the sky, there are huge patches which would look bigger than the moon in the night sky if you could see them, where millions of galaxies are already taken over by alien civilizations right now, but we can't see them due to the time lag between when they did that and how long the light would have to travel to get to where we are. And the assumption that humans are fairly typical observers, and the fact that we can't see alien life in the sky, means that alien grabby civilizations are likely to be expanding at some significant fraction of the speed of light, something like 30% of light speed or more. Because if you imagine a galaxy 10 million light years away, if a spacefaring civilization in that galaxy started expanding at only 1% of the speed of light, we'd be able to see the start of their expansion 10 million years after they started, when the light reached us. But it would take a billion years for them to actually reach us. Whereas, if they were expanding at, hypothetically, 90% the speed of light, we'd still see the start of their expansion 10 million years after it happened, but they would actually arrive at the Earth only 1 million years after that. So the likelihood of us looking up and seeing a universe that looks natural is higher the faster that alien grabby civilizations are expanding. I think it makes sense that they'd be traveling quickly though, right? If you've got millions or billions of years to advance your technology, you're probably going to plateau your technology out at whatever the best thing is that's physically possible to create. Even if it takes a million years to get to that level of technology, the number of years it takes you to get there is probably a tiny number compared to how many light years wide your civilization is eventually going to end up being. So that million years or however long it takes is just going to be the blink of an eye in the grand scheme of things. Also, all of this suggests that we've got somewhere between hundreds of millions and a few billion years before we meet another grabby civilization, by which time, if we survive and become grabby, we will have expanded to have an empire of some absurd number of galaxies of our own. The basic picture that it paints is that most civilizations end up with, at minimum, a really big fraction of their galaxy to themselves, and at maximum can have several galactic superclusters to themselves, and it's almost entirely dependent upon how early they are to being alive in the universe. The earlier you start this process, the more of the universe you get to claim. We're essentially competing with far-off alien species billions of light years away that were either born a few billion years ago or are yet to be born in upcoming billions or tens of billions of years. Like, a lot of them don't exist yet, and still we're essentially destined to eventually meet them and maybe have conflict with them, maybe unify with them. That's for you to decide. This model doesn't say anything about what happens when we meet them. And you know what? I think that if we don't destroy ourselves, I think we will become one of these grabby civilizations. The future of a huge amount of the universe is literally in our hands if we just get through this period of potential self-annihilation, which has never happened before, but is also probably never going to happen again. It's the most important inflection point that is going to happen in the entire history of life on this planet. Literally our generation and like a couple of generations in either direction. The amount of responsibility we have is actually insane. You know, people think that humans are insignificant in the scope of the universe, but I think that's kind of misguided. That's like saying a seed is small compared to a continent, and yeah, that's true, but if the continent is really fertile and hasn't got any trees on it yet, that one seed could become an entire continent-spanning forest if you just plant it properly. You know, we might be small for now, but nothing in the known universe has more potentiality than we do, and the consequences of what we do with our time right here and right now will reverberate throughout the universe and literally decide the fate of entire galactic superclusters in the future, which is kind of fucking mental to think about. You know what else is kind of fucking mental to think about? My elite level supporters. Thunderbolt 22A10, who's the governor of a Kardashev 3 civilization, Nomad Greg, who can move at 3 shenanigans per second, Andrew Mole, who can produce microwaves from his butthole, John Bejarano, who discovered the clitoris, JDK, who tried to fight fire with fire, but it turns out that in the eyes of the law that just makes you an arsonist, Mutantious Doom, who can subsist entirely on gravel, Stormester Ridder, who is the eternal cosmic force holding the universe in balance, Nikita Lurie, who can fold in half and get posted through a letterbox, Aaron Rowe, whose real name requires 3 tongues to pronounce, Bonk Chunk, who was voted Spacefaring Weekly's 38th most handsome sapient organism of 2025, That One Boy, who has no ass but must fart, Trenton Caldwell, who's allergic to entities from the 7th dimension, and thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to join the Patreon or the channel membership if you want to be featured in my video credits or chat on the Discord, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.